Hi, my name is Caitlin Garvey. I'm the author of a book called The Mourning Report, and it's scheduled to release October 6th from Homebound Publications. So it's a memoir that I wrote about 10 years after my mom died from breast cancer, where I go on sort of a grief journey, interviewing the people involved in her dying process, people like a priest, a funeral director, a hospice nurse, and an estate attorney. I really wanted to figure out why I was still grieving and also intersperse my story and my mom's story with theirs, to collect more memories of my mom, but also to sort of figure out how everyone experiences grief. Um, I wanted to read an excerpt from my book, from the chapter where I interview the embalmer. And it's just going to be a few pages. But if you're interested in reading more, you can order the book, pre-order for an October 6th delivery at Homebound Publications website, or you can visit my website, which is caitlinhogangarvey.com. So this is an interview with Charlie Williams, an Oak Park funeral director, and I'm reading about halfway into this chapter. So here goes. Embalming is not just a business for Charlie. It's an art form. The dead body, his canvas. An embalmer's goal is restoration. His end result, a done-up body, can be retouched and ultimately presented to the world, to the deceased loved ones as they remembered him or her. The deceased is dressed in an outfit chosen by the family, including underwear, and the viewing of the restoration commences the loved one's grieving processes. Restoration is a physical covering of scars, in a way distorting the reality of the body's battle with life. Charlie disposed of Mama's wound vac, and with it, the infectious materials that it managed to suck out, and then covered up the evidence on her body. Once we prayed above her restored body, we put dirt over the box, emptied it into the ground, and said amen. One of the greatest compliments Charlie's ever gotten, he says, was from a woman who had just buried her mother. Quote, "Mom looks great. She should have come here sooner." I think of Mama's body in its casket, the over-applied blue eyeshadow that she never would have worn, the stiffness of her hands folded together. As my sisters and I knelt before her body and pretended to pray, Megan blurted out, "What the fuck? This looks nothing like her." Her body was on center stage, and Megan was right. I remember thinking that Mama looked like a sculpture at a wax museum, her cheeks painted red to present the illusion of life, and all of the wake guests were there to pose with her likeness. When I stood next to the casket as visitors lined up to view her and say their goodbyes, I remembered a time when I was little and my family was snorkeling near the shore in South Carolina. My mask was too tight, and I tried to tell Mama through my mouthpiece, but what came out was just a gurgle. My heart was racing. I couldn't breathe. I screamed silently inside my mask. Mama swam to me, removed my mouthpiece, loosened the latches on my goggles, moved her own mouthpiece to the side, and then said, "You don't have to do this if you're scared." But I looked around and my sisters were doing it, and my dad, effortlessly, and I wanted to see what was underneath me too. I put my mouthpiece back in and watched the coral in one spot as I hovered in place. It wasn't the kind I'd seen in science books, the pretty kind. It looked like brains, dozens of them, dead, colorless brains getting picked apart by tiny fish. Charlie leans back in his chair, crosses his arms over his stomach, and begins to tell me about the time when he wished he could have taken, quote, the Crisco out of someone's husband in order to fit him in the casket the family wanted. After he says this, he stretches his arms to the side and winks at me as he adds, quote, "I'm talking huge here." That day, Charlie searched online for a larger casket, costing $200 more than the original, and paid for the difference himself. "I upserved them," he beams. Quote, "but I didn't tell the family because how much is your reputation worth? Like, gee, Mr. Smith, your brother is obese, so we're going to go with the jumbo model, which will cost you more money." He says he would never toot his own horn or ask the family if they like the way the body looks, but the transformation is his favorite part of the job. Quote, "You're taking this terrible, let me rephrase, this deceased person who looks like shit," he says while grinning, "and you're making a difference. Bathing, grooming, adjusting, preserving, and presenting." The worst thing that could happen in his business, he explains, is if someone said, quote, "I was in your place yesterday, and what did you do to Mr. Anderson? He looks like hell." Charlie shifts gears and runs his fingers through the casket catalog that sits next to his desk phone. Quote, "This particular casket is a good investment," says Charlie, who stops his finger on the image of the Kentucky rose. Quote, "because we all want to go out big." The Kentucky rose features a premium, delicate pink crepe interior, an embroidered pillow, and an adjustable bed and mattress. The orchid finish with lilac shading runs along its sides. Its ad instructs consumers to think pink. It can hold an overall weight of 240 pounds, and included in the price, $1,299, is a limited warranty against manufacturing defects. My eyes widen as I learn the price of a good investment, and Charlie perhaps sees my shock. "Listen, don't criticize people because they do this," he says, "because when it comes to the gloom and doom of selling caskets, there's always going to be a dead body." He continues, "Americans can afford to grieve. We can afford posh delivery units, Cadillacs to go to the grocery store, brown eggs, and range-free chickens. So if people have a certain way that they want to honor the death of a loved one, they're the ones who want it." When people come to me, Charlie adds, I stress why I serve them. It's because I want more. I want to be the concierge of the funeral business. I picture Mama's body on the preparation table, Charlie's service. He jots down a few details before beginning his work. White, female, 52 years old, breast cancer, double mastectomy, no reconstruction. The photo my dad gave him shows Mama holding a puppy by its belly and pressing its face against her right cheek. She's in the backyard of our house and wearing a bright blue shirt that matches her eyes and blue jeans. Her hair is short, straight, and blonde. She's smiling, genuinely not posed, at the puppy. She's healthy. It's a pre-cancer photo, and she's tall and lanky, maybe 140 pounds. I imagine Charlie setting the photo down and then looking at her body, naked on the prep table. There was no fat on her body when she died. As Charlie pushes the casket catalog to the corner of his desk, my mind escapes to a moment in 2012 when I was 23 and living in my dad's house in Oak Park. I had a therapist then who recommended that I try something called flotation therapy. Floating might allow me to experience some relief from my anxiety and depression, the therapist added, saying that I could sign up for an hour-long session at the Chicago Stress Relief Center. He explained the scientific benefits to sensory deprivation, including increases in dopamine and endorphin levels. A flotation tank contains about 10 inches of body temperature water, and in the water there are over 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts that allow a person to float effortlessly. Each tank is insulated against sound, and the float typically happens in total darkness. Before I stepped into the tank, a technician gave me instructions. Put in the provided earplugs, enter the tank backwards, close the hatch lid, and then relax on your back. After closing the lid, I extended my arms, hitting them against the sides of the enclosure. I was alone with my thoughts. The tank was about the same height and width of Mama's coffin. I thought of her embalmed body, arms at her side and eyes closed. I tried the technician's suggested position. Head back, arms crossed over your chest, legs separated an inch or two, like you're relaxing in bed. Because it was my first time floating, the technician recommended that I turn on the blue underwater light so that I would at least be able to see my surroundings while getting used to the sensation. I was naked, as he had suggested, and I stared down at my pale stomach, wondering how, during the hour-long float, I'd be able to focus on anything other than the things I considered odd about my body. My breasts, my stretch marks, my big toe, the mole underneath my right eye. Epsom salt stings sensitive skin, and I became aware of my paper cuts, my hangnail, my leg shaving accident. The salt caked in my ear, and I took long, deep breaths through my mouth to calm myself down. But the lid to the tank seemed like it was caving in on me, and my stomach felt like it was expanding, like it would swell to the size of the size of the tank, and I'd be stuck, and they'd have to cut open the tank to pull me out, and everyone would stare at my nude body as it was on the brink of exploding. My head felt too heavy for my neck. I remembered reading that a cockroach can live for weeks without its head, its body responding to stimuli without awareness until it dies from dehydration. I listened to the sound of my heartbeat and I closed my eyes. I saw Mama in scrubs, the nurse pressing the cold stethoscope to her chest and then lowering it to listen to her lungs. I crossed my hands over my heart and I thought of Mama calming me down after an asthma attack. It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now. You're alive. I ran my fingers through the water and then through my wet hair, which was already straw like from the salt. And I thought of wigs and wounds and the moment before Mama's body was wheeled out of the bedroom. And I wished I could live for weeks without a head. I thought of my sisters and me trailing behind Mama's coffin to the altar, our legs heavier with each step. Wasn't the tank supposed to make me feel lighter? I wanted to get out of the tank, to breathe outside air, to shout at the tank technician that I was still there, that he shouldn't forget about me. But I was sure that if I screamed, no one would hear me. So I kept my eyes closed and put my arms down to the side, aware of my impending burial. I waited for what felt like days for the music to play over the room speaker, the signal that the session was over. My hands were shaking when I got out of the tank, and they stayed that way for almost an hour afterward. And as I stared down at them, I wondered if I was just one of those people for whom the world is not made, and if I just didn't belong here or anywhere.